I'm here with Summer Taylor, an auditor with 20 years experience practicing the application of judgment. She is also an award-winning instructor of auditing and accounting standards. Summer, there's been a lot of discussions these days about how the impact of technology is having on the CPA profession. Things like AI and analytics, and a concern by some that this could reduce or eliminate the need for human interaction. What are your thoughts on this?
This is probably one of the top questions that I get when I go out to colleges and talk to students about a career in professional services and accounting. You know, people tend to think of folks in my profession of accounting and auditing as bean counters, and there's a level of objectivity related to counting beans. But in reality, when you kind of peel back the curtain a little bit and look behind the scenes, there is a lot of judgment required in accounting and auditing. And frankly, these are the moments when we can provide a lot of value to not just our clients, but to the marketplace as well. And so having the tool of being able to have really good professional judgment is very important for future success in the industry. And frankly, you know, that is not going to eliminate the need for human interaction because of that. So
being poised and ready to respond to those moments is important. Let's talk about how you can develop that sense of professional judgment. For all of us, can you just define professional judgment for us so we know what it is?
Yeah, sure. So people tend to think of professional judgment as an instinct or a gut reaction. But in reality, professional judgment is actually a quite methodical process that you go through. So it's a well-reasoned process based on facts and circumstances that you have at the time you're making your decision. And it involves an element of knowledge, experience, and objectivity as well.
On the note of process, can you go through the process with us so we know that we've thought everything through?
Yeah, absolutely. The Center for Audit Quality issued a really great white paper on professional judgment and what are the elements of that process which make it particularly effective. So I created my own little insurance policy to help me remember the elements of professional judgment. I call it the IFLAC process. So issue, facts, literature, analysis, and conclusion. So walking through that, the first step is to identify the issue. And I like to think of this as the question statement. What's the issue you're trying to resolve? And are there any other peripheral issues that you might want to tackle at the same time? The next one is to gather the facts. And so in this process, you want to fully understand the facts and circumstances because that's really critical to making your judgment. So you're going to read the underlying contracts, documentation, and then talk to people involved to understand, you know, the form over substance or substance over form of the underlying transaction or judgment that you're trying to make. The next step is to understand the literature. So in my business, we have accounting and auditing standards that we have to comply with, but all professionals have some kind of rules or policies or guidance that they have to stay within. And so understanding what those are in relation to the issue is important. The next step is probably the most important part of the process, and that's the analysis phase. And in this process, what you're going to do is understand the different alternatives available to you. By virtue of being a judgment, there's more than one possible answer. And so in this phase, what you're doing is weighing the different alternatives. Why would someone choose option A and not choose option A? Why would someone choose option B or not choose option B? And what are the consequences of each of those decisions? And then last step, probably the simplest, is you pick an alternative and you say why you picked it. And for folks in my industry or others that might get challenged as to their judgment, documentation at this phase is critical. And when I say documentation, I mean contemporaneous documentation like today, not 6 months from now when you forgot what you were thinking about in the first place.
Well, these judgments can often be faulty and full of biases. How can we avoid these biases?
Yeah. So the Center for Audit Quality white paper also addresses different biases of when good judgment goes bad. Some of those biases include confirmation bias. And so this is when we seek out information which confirms our initial reaction. Availability, I like to call this the Google effect. So this is when you tend to look to the most readily available information to support the judgment. So think of that as like the first hit on Google and not necessarily scrolling down to the bottom or even the next page of the Google search. Anchoring is another bias which you can encounter. That's when you tie your underlying expectation to something that's fundamentally not correct. And then the last one is overconfidence. So I like to call that the know-it-all syndrome. So sometimes we can run into that. There are also pressures that can cause good judgment to go bad. Things like rushing to solve, budgetary constraints, time constraints, groupthink. And really the way to overcome some of these biases and pressures is to first of all be aware that they exist. We all come to the table with these types of biases, and so being aware of them is important to overcoming them. I always like to say you want to stay ahead of the issue before they become problems, and this allows you more time to resolve issues. And then lastly, I would say consult. If you were to receive a medical diagnosis which was quite severe, you might want a second opinion. Well, the same holds true with judgments that you're making. And when you can involve more people in that process, you tend to get a better, more objective analysis. And the last thing I'd say is trust your gut. If you go through this process and it doesn't look right, it doesn't feel right, it may not be right. And so that's the time to just press the pause button and say, have I really done a thorough process in making this judgment?
I like that last one. Trust your gut. A lot of great information. Thank you for joining us today, and be sure to tune into future human intelligence segments.